This is Jim with Marine Electronics Installation. Today I'm here to go over our second part of our sonar series. Today we'll be covering the different types of sonar that can be used for fish finding, cruising, sailing, and some advantages and disadvantages to those types of sonar. First off, traditional sonar, or sometimes it's called conventional or pulse sonar. Most of the time you'll hear it called traditional. This has been around for a lot of years. This has been the standard for a very long time. It's basically a straight down image from below the transducer, which is usually mounted on the rear of the boat, somewhere behind the center line of the boat. So it can be used for finding fish, structure, ledges, wrecks, coral. It's also handy when you're trying to anchor up over a spot. When it's looking directly below the boat, you can determine when you're right above the structure for fishing. So this can be a chirp, this can be traditional, it can be low frequency, mid frequency, high frequency. Basically it's just looking below the back of the boat. That is the traditional sonar. We've also got side imaging, which has been around for a few years now, and side imaging is good for inshore and coastal use up to about 100-120 feet of water. Some of the units are spec'd at 150 feet or 200, but they really work well to about 100 feet maximum. You can go a little deeper with them, but they don't display detail real well sometimes when you start getting to the limitations of the unit. This is due partially to the higher frequency that most of these use. The higher frequency gives you a little more detail, but it also limits the range that the transducer will work at. The side imaging paints a nice image out to the right and left side of the boat, and it needs to be used at low speeds. Although we've installed some side imaging transducers that still track bottom above 30 miles per hour, there's a lot of loss of detail. You really need to be between about 5 and 12 miles an hour for the best detail on most of these side imaging machines. They're great for locating structure, breaks, shipwrecks, artificial reefs. They're really good for that. A lot of times they'll paint out about 5 times the depth that you're in. So if you're in, say, 10 feet of water, they'll look out about 50 feet to each side of the boat. That's not an absolute number, but that's just a rough estimate of how far most of these can look out to the side. Forward scanning sonar, this technology has been around for quite a while. There's been one manufacturer that's been using this for sailing and cruising boats. Mainly they've been using it to see that you're not getting into shallow water ahead of the boat and to locate channels. It's been used for anchorage and navigation for many years, and some of the companies have recently jumped on this technology and they're running it with a little more resolution now. You can actually see structure a little better. You can see large schools of fish with this technology. It's still fairly new, and I think it's got a little ways to go yet, but it can be useful for fishing, but very useful for sailboats, cruising boats. If you're trying to stay in a narrow channel, you can determine if you're in that channel or not and how deep that channel is out in front of the boat. Typically, these view 5 to 10 times the depth of the water. So again, if you're in 10 feet, usually you can see 50 to 100 feet in front of the transducer location. Down scan. This is not a real new technology, but hasn't been around a long time. What it is very similar to traditional sonar. Is looking directly below the boat, but at a much higher frequency. What this allows is more detail below the boat, but the disadvantage is it cannot penetrate the water as well due to the high frequency. So you're limited to about 150 to 200 feet for decent performance. Beyond then, 250, 300 feet, you're not really going to see much detail in this. 360 degree all around imaging. There is one company, actually 2 companies, but one company that is kind of recreational equipment, and the other company is commercial equipment for long range commercial use. But they've played around with this for a little bit. It's been out for a few years. You have to be stationary at anchor or at a very slow drift for this to work. But it's good for inshore and really shallow coastal, but mainly inshore. This works great for freshwater lakes, rivers. As far as saltwater, not real good in saltwater because it's very limited to the depths and distance that it can display. With that said, the most important thing is to determine how you're using your boat. If you're going to be, fishing in a coastal, shallow water area, side imaging would be really good with maybe a chirp transducer for directly below the boat. That would be a good combination. If you're doing a lot of cruising, traveling, obviously forward scan, forward imaging would be nice with a traditional transducer also, so you can see the depth directly below the boat. For offshore fishing, chirp would be really nice. Something that you could do maybe low and high, or maybe a mid-band chirp, which will give you good detail below the boat. And if your boat sees some shallower water use, say in 100 feet or less, then side imaging may also be a good option for an offshore boat. And the 360, it's really limited to shallow water. I would say that's more of an inshore boat that you would use in up in a harbor, intercoastal waterway, somewhere where you don't normally exceed 30-40 feet of water would be an ideal location for 360 degree transducer. So with that said, a lot of times combinations of these technologies work really well. If you have a dual purpose boat, you're fishing inshore and you're going to run a little ways offshore, maybe on really good days, weather's good, you want to run out to 50, 60, 80 feet of water and fish, side imaging and a traditional sonar would be a really good fit for that boat. If you're going to be strictly offshore, you're not going to stop till you're past 100 feet of water 90% of the time, then side imaging would probably not be a good idea. But your chirp sonar would probably be really good for that boat, maybe in a combination of a low and high or a mid-frequency, which will give you good detail in deeper water, would be ideal for that boat. We'll get into a little more detail on the actual transducers, beam widths, and depths that they'll work in really well in future videos. But I wanted to cover the different types, and mainly you want to choose the type or types of sonar that will fit the boat and the type of fishing that you're doing. Thank you for watching, and we'll go into more detail on sonar in our next video.